question before the House is that the House note grievances. The member from Morialta.
Thank you, sir. And I want today to talk about the state of the state, and in particular in relation to employment. And there was an extraordinary statement made by the Treasurer not 5 minutes ago that payroll tax is apparently giving money, payroll tax cuts are apparently giving money back to businesses, as if it wasn't those businesses' money in the first place. And I think this goes to the heart of the problem with why the South Australian economy is in such poor shape, that the Treasurer of a state would think that giving a grant to a company is in fact philosophically the same, economically the same, as taking money from that company in a tax and then giving it to other companies, is at the heart of the problem. The Treasurer and the government do not understand how business works, how tax works, and how the economy works. At the end of the day, what is payroll tax but a tax on jobs? It is a disincentive to hire people. And the fact that he doesn't understand that is a serious concern. Now, when we're considering where we go with jobs and how does one judge the state of South Australia, I was interested on the weekend to be given the advice of the Leader of the Federal Opposition, Mr Bill Shorten, the Honourable Bill Shorten indeed, and he had some interesting things to say. He said, for the past 2 years, our economy has been wallowing in mediocrity. Unemployment is too high, growth is too slow. He said, for Labor, jobs has always been the ultimate test, the gold standard of whether our economy is growing as strongly as it should and as fairly as it should. Jobs is how Labor measures our transitions beyond the mining boom into the next wave of future industries and opportunities. He went on to say, jobs is how we judge whether or not everyone has a stake in our society, the chance to climb out of poverty, disadvantage and dispossession. Now, if jobs is such a concern for Mr Shorten that at 6.3% the national jobs rate is too high, that is leading people to dispossession, disadvantage and poverty, how much worse for us in South Australia, where under 14 years of this Labor government we've got 8% unemployment and 1.7% above the national average. There are surely no people who are suffering more under the assessment made by Mr Shorten than those who are struggling under the reign of the South Australian Labor government. And when we have this consideration, we have a CommSec report that comes out yesterday that identifies that after years and years and years of Tasmania, in fact, being the state of concern in Australia, we hear CommSec saying things like this: South Australia has had the 7th spot on the economic performance rankings, but Tasmania is showing better momentum. Tasmania remains at the bottom of the Australian economic performance table, but importantly, it is now top on unemployment and 3rd ranked on housing finance. Interestingly, South Australia's 8% jobless rate stands at a 15-year high, while Tasmania's 6.2% jobless rate is approaching 4-year lows. And it was not ever thus. In March last year, on March the 15th last year, there were 2 elections. There was an election in Tasmania and election in South Australia. A tale of 2 cities, if you will, Deputy Speaker, between Adelaide and Hobart. But what happened in South Australia and Tasmania? Well, in both cases, the Liberal Party got a clear majority of the vote and less than 1 in 3 people voted for Labor. But unfortunately for the people of South Australia, we've ended up with a Labor government that has continued their poor and shoddy economic settings, that has continued with a view that payroll tax is somehow morally inferior to giving grants to private sector companies when the government decides to pick their winners. At the time, on March the 15th, 2014, the Tasmanian unemployment rate on trend figures was 7.5%. South Australia was in fact better off at 7.3%. And what's happened since? They have had a Liberal reformist government led by Will Hodgman and Treasurer Peter Gutwein, and through the settings that Tasmania has put in place, it hasn't been a recovery led by Princess Mary Donaldson or Ricky Ponting or the Film Archive of Errol Flynn. They have in fact reduced their unemployment rate to 6.2%, while South Australia has gone up by 8%. Tasmania is 1.8% below us in unemployment. Just think about that for a second, how extraordinary that is. And it hasn't been easier for Tasmania. It hasn't all been Cadbury factories and caravanning. Tasmania had to put up with the extraordinary impact of not only a Labor government, but a Labor Greens government. There were 3 ministers in that Labor government who were members of the Greens: the Attorney-General, the Minister for Sustainable Transport, Greens members of Parliament in a Labor Greens government in Tasmania. And yet, in just 18 months, we've seen an extraordinary change. The Labor government, after 4 years in which Premier Weatherill has seen unemployment grow from 5.2% to 8%, immediately needs to act to bring forward the stamp duty relief, immediately needs to commit to reducing payroll tax. They need to create a state-based productivity commission. They need to push ahead with creating job infrastructure, such as the Strzelecki track, to look at things on a cost-benefit ratio, to put forward some of the liberal reformist agendas that we've suggested. I urge them to do so immediately because the South Australian people have suffered for too long.
Member's time has expired. Member for Raynell.